From the tragedy in Tumbler Ridge to solidifying a new collective agreement for frontline hospital workers and First Nations leadership addressing the issue of separation. Time now for tonight's politics panel, and joining us this evening, political analyst John Santos and Don Hill, co-founder of the blog Beyond Polarity and a longtime broadcast journalist in Alberta. Good evening to you both, and let's begin with the nation honoring the victims of a mass shooting at a school in Tumbler Ridge in northeastern BC, a small community not far from the Alberta border. Here's what federal leaders were saying today in the nation's capital.
We will get through this, we will learn from this, but right now it's a time to come together, as Canadians always do in these situations, these terrible situations, to support each other, to mourn together, and to grow together.
The fact that this took place at a secondary school, it makes it even more tragic. As a father, I can't even imagine the phone calls that parents might have received. I can't imagine the heartache and hell that they're living through at this moment. This is a time for all Canadians to unite, to support the families and the community at large.
RCMP say they responded to an active shooter at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School Tuesday afternoon, arrived to find 6 people, plus the suspected shooter dead. 1 person died en route to hospital, and another 2 victims found dead inside a home believed to be connected. Another 25 people treated at a local medical center. John, emotional remarks from political leadership. Flags, federal buildings, now flying at half staff for the next 7 days. Business of governments hitting pause, even here in Alberta. News conferences scheduled for today with the Premier and a number of cabinet ministers postponed. What does the Canadian response speak to, even in comparison to what might be seen through a similar situation south of the border?
Yeah, this is an absolutely tragic event, and you can see the emotion as the federal leaders gave their response. And, you know, to your question, I think the very sober, very slow response that not just Canadian political leaders, but Canadian news outlets and most aspects of the Canadian citizenry have had to this tragedy sort of show that, yeah, like we're focusing on the human element, and we're prioritizing the fact that we need to support the families of the victims in this tragedy, and we need to focus on supporting the families of the victims and not get caught up in any kind of speculation, because that's just not good for pursuing the truth and finding out why this individual committed such a horrific act.
Don, as many saying today, this is not a time for political debate. What kind of conversation, though, do you see eventually evolving from this at a political leadership level?
Oh, Michael, this is a terrible question to have to address, in the sense that this is a question of storytelling at this point. The stories that we're hearing is hope and prayers and things like that, but it doesn't get at the causality of these kinds of events. The problem yesterday for a lot of people who are following this story, especially on social media, is media outlets. Some of them are reputable, some of them not so much reputable. We're already on top of the story and identifying the shooter. And I think we're going to have an honest conversation among all of ourselves about how much is too much information and what's not enough in order to get at past the speculation right away. So by not responding as quickly as perhaps we should have in terms of the information spectrum, it's created other problems that we're going to have to deal with and talk over in the months, perhaps years to come.
Indeed. Okay, next up for us, the union representing thousands of frontline hospital workers in Alberta says its new collective agreement with the province has been ratified. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says the deal ensures 27,000 hospital support staff earn living wages by April 2027. Highlights include 12% pay increase retroactive to April of 2024 and a 2% long service wage increase for staff with more than 20 years of service. The union's president says the contract recognizes the vital work members do, and Finance Minister Nate Horner says it provides workers fair compensation. In November, a deal was reached with more than 16,000 nursing care staff just minutes before they were set to strike. Don, a relatively quiet end to what was shaping up as a tumultuous time in labor relations. What do you see ratification of this deal signifying?
I think in some cases the UCP is trying to calm everybody down. And what has been a tumultuous year for labor relations, whether it's with the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees at Hospitals, or for that matter, the Alberta Teachers Association. Where this is going to go from here is going to be very interesting, considering that we're going to be getting to this, that we're probably looking at a referendum, perhaps two, as early as perhaps the fall of this year. So I think the government is, perhaps, I hope they are, it's just get everybody to calm down a bit so we can talk about a bunch of different issues that are going to be on our plate, again, probably within weeks or months from now.
John, in a statement, Finance Minister Nate Horner said it concludes collective bargaining with the province's major health sectors for this round of negotiations. Consider this a win where the provincial government is concerned?
I think the province can count this as a win. This is a demonstration not just for the province, but for AUPE, who can also count this as a win, that they can negotiate and make deals. I think the important distinction between this and the teachers' strike is that this in many respects was a simpler deal to make. That's not to minimize the concerns that the AUPE brought forward, but pay figured a lot more of a factor in this deal than in the ATA, where most of the teachers' concerns were coming from classroom conditions, class sizes, that sort of thing. Here, pay figured to as a bigger part of the grievances that AUP had, and so, you know, if it just comes down to money, that's something that the province can throw at them, you know, instead of fixing like deeper, more systemic issues, which are ultimately going to cost a lot more money. So I think that's part of the reason why this was an easier deal for AUPE and the province to make, is because money was a bigger factor here than, or pay rather, I should say, was a bigger factor here than it was in the ATA dispute. Well,
and where the AUPE is concerned, a little bit of labor calm now, bargaining again in 2028, so a couple of years' time. All right, speaking of time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, First Nations leadership speaking out on the issue of separation. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. A message from First Nations leaders to those pushing for Alberta to separate.
That they can take the dirt that maybe their ancestors brought with them under their fingernails when they came over here from other places, because that's the only piece of land that they're going to take.
At a meeting of the Assembly of First Nations in Calgary Tuesday, Chief Woodhouse-Nepanak declaring any separation proposal unconstitutional without the collective consent of First Nations, labeling the entire movement illegitimate. John, what do you see this response from First Nations leadership reflecting about the state of the general dialogue in the province, or even nationally, around handling of the push for separatism?
It certainly was a strong response, and I'm not surprised. I don't think anyone else is surprised by what the national chief said. And it's showing that across the country, opponents of Alberta separation are coming out swinging. And I mean, I appreciate where they're coming from, and you know, certainly her argument that you know, Alberta can leave, but it can't take treaty land with that. I mean, the idea of if Canada is divisible, then so must provinces. I mean, that goes back to discussions during the 1995 Quebec sovereignty referendum. But I think what I would say, as you know, somebody who studies and tracks Alberta public opinion, is that while I appreciate where federalists from across the country are coming from, I think the response and the criticism and the level of anger needs to be calibrated, because what I'm concerned about is that people who are not solidly separatist but are separatist curious get pushed into the separatist camp because of the very heated opposition from across the Canada. So that's really sort of my big concern here.
Don, Alberta's not yet at the point of a referendum on separation. It's only at the petition stage. So how worried are you about the state of dialogue developing here, the debate that could evolve?
And John brings up a superb point, and I'll add to that with regards to evolution. The province of Quebec is going to have an election no later than October. And it's very clear from what the polls are saying there that the Parti Québécois will be leading that province. And the Parti Québécois last summer, the summer before this one, took out an ad on English language television and said over and over, Canada costs too much. Now, that's an interesting lead up to what is going to be a very interesting fall here in our neck of the woods. I also agree with John is that by not calibrating the rhetoric and not taking into account other aspirations, this is the third time around for Quebec if they do have a referendum, and the Parti Québécois has said that that's what they're going to do. So we've got a war on two fronts if you're a sovereigntist, and that's interesting because often when you have a war on two fronts, something's got to give.
John, we heard from Timothy Caulfield off the top, noted expert on misinformation. What's your read on potential dangers of information flow around the issue of separation?
It's incredibly dangerous. And as Don said, I mean, this is a two-front. This could very well be a two-front war. And what's different about now versus 1995 is the information environment is fragmented, the media landscape is fragmented, and it's going to be very difficult to keep foreign actors out. Whereas before, it's like you could stop foreign agents from buying up newspaper space or buying TV ads. Now that so much media is done through the internet where there's very little control of it, it's very easy to generate AI, deepfake videos. It's going to be very easy to spread around misinformation and disinformation. You know, and just if that wasn't scary enough, I just want to emphasize that research has shown that everyone's vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation, regardless of political leanings, education level, cognitive ability. And we will see, I'm not going to say we will see misinformation and disinformation campaigns targeting both the pro and the anti-separatist sides in an effort to fuel affective political polarization. And we're about to enter very, very dangerous territory.
Don, given the potential political polarization, what degree of responsibility then rests on the shoulders of our elected representatives, be they provincial, be they federal?
Well, first off, I think they've got to get out on the land. They have to get away from 30,000 feet, and no slam on Dr. Caulfield. They have to get out of the universities, and no slam on you, John. They have to stop paying attention to polls. When years and years ago, when I was in a CBC newsroom, as it turned out, we had a bumper sticker. It said, lie to pollsters sometimes. So let me just emphasize this. In the Quebec referenda, I think it was 95 or 80, one or the other, the polls were saying that 80% of Quebecers were pro-Canada. Well, it didn't turn out that way, did it? We got very, very close. So, and the second point connected to that one is the best thing to ask a person, are you for or again, is what do your friends think about this? And I think that's where the information lies. And what I'm hearing on the ground is we're not too far off because of humiliation, just like they say in Quebec, of saying, you know what, let's pull the trigger and see what happens. And I don't take any pleasure in saying that. We're really, really, really close to skillful operatives mobilizing the crowd to make a bad decision, arguably like they did in the UK.
John, last word to you. What role do you see for the Smith government in moderating or managing the separatism conversation?
I mean, I think as much as the Smith government is conflicted because of the internal party tensions, the fact that she's tried to slow down a lot of the conversation regarding separation, I think any leader or figure that says, let's just slow down and think about this and talk about this and try and, you know, remove as much of the emotion from it as possible. Like those are very constructive things. And that's how we combat the passions of the moment and being prone to misinformation and disinformation. So, yeah, I think anything we can do to slow down the conversation is going to be very important.
All right, gentlemen, we will slow it down right now. We're out of time. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thanks, Michael. Good to talk to you, John.